Good evening, everyone. It's time for Booting Up, where bootcamp grads can learn from people that have been in their shoes and succeeded in tech. So tonight's guest works at Box. She's a software engineer, and she's really, really smart. So we're going to learn a lot from her tonight. Before we get into that, if it's your first time here, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you enjoy, leave a like. If you have any questions, just leave them in the chat. We will make sure to answer every single one, I promise. So without further ado, let's bring on Skye.
Hello.
Skye,
It's going great. Thanks for having me.
thank you for coming on. You're definitely doing a good deed to help out some people. So I would definitely appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm excited for the
Yeah,
talk
so let's take
today.
it. Yeah, me too. Me too. So I know that we talked about it already in terms of your name, but I know everyone's probably wondering how you got the name Sky Free. So can you just quickly give us the story of your very unique name?
Thank you. Yeah, my unique name has been a great conversation starter my whole life. uh my name, I guess the short answer was I definitely had kind of hippie parents. So parents, my full name is Skye Willow Free. So my parents loved to have some inspiration from nature there. And then Skye was actually a great mix because I have some Scottish history. And
There you
there's
go.
a island called the Isle of Skye. And so that's where we got the Skye spelling. Yeah.
No, I love it. It's definitely very fitting. Breaking free or breaking free of old job, going into tech. So very very fitting there. So let's start at the top in terms of where you came from. So you started in sociology, I believe.
Yeah. I started by studying international relations and sociology. Mhm.
There you go. So what got you into studying how people interact?
Oh yeah. Oh, that's a awesome question. I think over my life, I had definitely been like I think I had always been like social justice minded, and so a lot of my interests kind of geared towards studying history, studying groups of people, group dynamics, and also like reflecting on the people within your life and like how you live and realizing that a lot of the way we live our life is influenced by our society and societal norms, and how that can often be quite relative. Like different cultures have different ways of developing and raising young humans, and so yeah, so a lot of it had to do with the interest of what that meant for me and how I viewed the world.
So was there something specific you were looking to learn about when you went into that, or something you were trying to change, maybe?
So if I go way back when I was very young and very optimistic, originally what I had read a lot of interviews with essentially uh, like global leads in peacemaking actually. So the reason that I initially studied international relations was because I had originally thought about going into diplomacy and working in peace and conflict resolution. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So you went into that, and then coming out of college, what were you thinking in terms of work?
Yeah, so essentially entering college and taking those courses, I had initially thought I would go into academia. And so a lot of the work that I did during college, some internships, and then also during the school year, I would do research projects. So I worked with professors to basically get to know what research looked like. And then through that, it was a great opportunity for me to learn that it wasn't quite the right fit for me. And so basically by the end of college, I realized like I really loved studying these things and learning about these things, but in terms of building my career on continuing to do that, I realized it wasn't quite the right fit. And so what that meant is I graduated and I actually felt like a little bit like I had a lack of direction. Um, and so I ended up kind of jumping into the job market. And I graduated in the Bay Area. And so I was just kind of looking to see what was out there. And it was kind of that moment where, the world is your oyster. I wanted to see what might stick. And so the first job I tried was very unrelated to my studies, but it was working in a digital marketing agency in the Bay Area. Yeah.
Yeah. So you did digital marketing, and then you also had a sales position, right?
Yeah. So yeah, first job was digital marketing. Second job was kind of similar. Both of them had to do with account management.
Okay.
So working with our customers and clients and updating them, managing their accounts. So yeah, so the second job was like sales account management at a startup.
Nice. So yeah, you did some of that stuff. So that's more like people facing stuff. So I guess the sociology kind of ties into it a little bit, so studying how people interact. But yeah, I guess in terms of like doing that for a couple of years, what kind of hit you and you're like, all right, let me go into tech? Was it just, being surrounded by it in the Bay Area?
So I would say the immediate thing, yeah, it was probably a couple things. In the Bay Area in general, the great thing about the digital marketing agency was, it still is within the tech industry, and it evolved a lot of search engine marketing and search engine optimization. And
Mhm.
so that was actually a really nice intro into like, how websites work, how people, gather traffic
Yes.
to the websites. So it was a really awesome introduction. So I think that kind of planted some seeds. And then the awesome thing about working at the startup was actually that when it's a small company like that, you end up interacting with so many different people across different departments
Mhm.
because there's only so many of you. And so I got to make friends with the engineers on the other side because there's only a dozen of us. And so the great thing about that is you get to actually see what they do day to day, like up close, and then you get to like have conversations about why they got into it, how they problem solve, and then it was actually very mutual. It was great because since I was on the account management side, the sales side, you need a lot of data for your customers as well. And
Yeah.
so they actually started teaching me like little SQL queries so I could go look up information on my own. And the real light bulb moment for me there, I think it was a mix of timing because they basically started asking me the question like, oh, like you're good at this. Like, why didn't you go into engineering? And sometimes, like, maybe people would have asked me that growing up, right? But I feel like the timing of that moment where I had been out in the industry a couple years, I still hadn't put my finger on like where I wanted my career to go. And then having that feedback from like talking with the engineers and my team, I was like, oh, why not? Yeah, why am I not in this industry? Why don't I try it out for myself? And then luckily there's some awesome resources out on the internet. I found something called the Odin Project, which has
What is that?
great, basically, it's kind of like a mini coding bootcamp online. So you can find really awesome resources for learning like CSS, HTML basics, writing your first basic web page. And once I started practicing that, then I got hooked, and like the rest is history. Once I realized that I could just like write a few words and then like spin up a beautiful website, I was like, oh, this is great.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
it's magical. And
Hmm.
I think it's really, really cool that your coworkers kind of like showed you everything. I think that's something that, people that are either in a boot camp or are in job searching, like are in a job, should look for that. Like talk to people in your company, and then you can kind of get a quick little taste, get their feedback, and maybe even a connection into another team. So I like that you did
Yeah.
that before. You kind of got your feet wet to make sure it was a good thing.
Hmm. Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
then, what made you go into Hack Reactor?
Hack Reactor was awesome. So this was I think this was 2015 or 2016 when I started thinking about it. And one of those engineers on my team had actually mentioned coding bootcamps. Before that, I had never heard of them before. So they kind of just mentioned that was a possibility. And then through research, Hack Reactor ended up being one of the ones that popped up a lot and had
Mhm.
really great stats in terms of job placement, essentially. And then through the interview process, I interviewed with a couple different boot camps. For me, it was just the people who I interacted with at Hack Reactor just seemed super professional, super upbeat, like really excited about what they did. And so I was just like really excited about doing Hack Reactor specifically.
Yeah, no, I think choosing the right boot camp is also huge because each one kind of has different programs. And I feel like some people that might have had a negative experience and people that had a positive experience, it's not just, hey, all boot camps are bad, all boot camps are good. It's more, hey, this boot camp was good or bad for me. How do you find a good one? So you enjoyed your experience, right?
Yeah. I was super glad to. Yeah, there's zero regrets. I actually loved it so much that I stayed on for another 3 months. So
Like learning or teaching?
Teaching, yeah.
Teaching.
So they had an opportunity to kind of stay on at, like, they called it a hacker in residence at the time. And so essentially you could stay on and help support the next cohort, do a little extra studying on your own, and also you also like interviewed the incoming prospective students as well.
Yeah, a lot of boot camps have that now, where basically called a TA usually is basically the main thing, and you teach people that are in your position, like what the position you were in basically 3 months ago. So you know exactly what they're going through.
Yeah.
So then I guess that's kind of job experience. But then in terms of going into the field, I saw that you started with freelancing actually. So what made you decide like, hey, I'm going to start with this? Was it intentional, or that was just kind of like the path that happened?
So for me, I got really lucky while I was in that TA role, where essentially one of the other TAs had got the contract through some network or some connection that they had, and they needed more help for the project that they were working on. And so I was super lucky that, like, through that network connection, essentially, the position was available, and I tried out for it, and they hired me. So it was a great position because I was split between working part-time as the TA and part-time as a freelancer. So it was a really good kind of like intro into actual production ready code. So learning the ropes around GitHub and some basics around AWS and that sort of thing. It was a really good intro way to get my feet wet before jumping into a full-time role. Yeah.
No, it's good. I guess you kind of got lucky, but also kind of from you talk to people and then you got this opportunity. So that's cool. And so you think in terms of someone that's coming out of boot camp to get a freelancing gig, do you think it's mostly just, again, talking to people, or have you seen like other tips work for people?
Good question. I guess for me, a lot of the roles that I've landed have often been through network. So that's been the experience that I've had that's been most successful. Yeah. But I definitely know people who use, I think at the time they used Gigster, I believe, or maybe it was Upwork. But they were able to use some of those sites to find some small gigs because for some of my cohort mates, they also kind of like me, they wanted a little extra time to study, and so they did like part-time gigs while they studied as well.
Gotcha. Okay, so you get this gig. I know me personally, I'd have a little bit of imposter syndrome, being like, hey, I'm gonna build a project for someone. Like who am I just coming out of this boot camp? So like, did you kind of have to deal with that?
Yes, definitely. I would say the really nice thing was that because my fellow cohort mate or TA was also on the same project, it was really great because it kind of like reduced some of that fear, because we could just kind of like hash it out together and try and figure it out together, which really did make a difference. But I would say that in hindsight, I was definitely there too short. I think like if I had done it differently, I might have done the gig for a lot longer, because it almost felt like an internship. By the end, I have to say, I don't know if I produced a ton of excellent work for them, but I definitely appreciated the shot that they gave me, and the fact that they were able to take the time to teach me a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess like at least you learned, you got your feet wet a little bit there, and you're able to learn some stuff. So like when you were trying to approach the problem or project, like what was your approach there?
So definitely two approaches. The internet is your number one resource, just like searching for Stack Overflow posts. The task I had to do with writing a PHP script, and I'd never used PHP before.
PHP
So
stuff.
like that was that was the other tip. I think in hindsight, if I was to get a gig, I would have tried to find a gig that was a little bit closer of a match to what I studied in the boot camp. I think if it had been in JavaScript, then I think I would have had a lot less trouble jumping into it.
Yeah.
That would have been like a perfect match. But since it was brand new, then yeah, just diving into the internet. And then the other thing was the person who was the lead on this project, who was actually like full time at this company. He was super nice, and so we just like sent him Slack messages. We were in person once a week, so we got to like actually sit down with him and sit down and like pair program for a little bit as well, which is great.
Yeah, having that mentor or like a teacher in your first role, I think that's always huge because you're gonna have questions, and if you hold them back, it's kind of like when something's bothering you and like you don't address it, it just kind of like builds up. So like you need to ask those questions. So it's good you had the outlet.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely.
So then, you mentioned that the gig was a little bit too short. So what ended it? Was it you, or was it a job?
Yeah, it was me.
Okay.
I got or a job. Yeah. So the great thing was so this was 3 months after graduating from the boot camp. So I had done the TA-ship for 3 months.
Okay.
And at the end of that, I actually got really lucky and was able to land a job right off the bat. So
Nice.
since it was a full-time job, I ended up ending the freelance work.
What was the biggest factor that you think got you that job?
Ooh, great question. I mean, the number one factor was doing the coding boot camp.
Having the skills,
yeah,
of course.
it's the skills and also the preparation that they do for doing interviews and for getting out there, like doing a bunch of applications, doing a bunch of interviews. It's just so much great practice. And so when you're actually out there and like doing all of the interviews, you start to realize the more interviews you do, you start to realize like, oh wait, I'm actually like ready for this training program was like an excellent fit. And for all of specifically the front end interviews I was doing, like it was just such a great fit. So yeah, definitely the preparation that they do there. The number two, repeating what I said earlier, it was definitely network.
Okay.
Yeah, so the great thing that I got to experience because I stayed on for another 3 months was actually by that time, several of my cohort mates had actually already landed jobs. Uh, and so it meant that like I could kind of reach out to them and just see if they were probably on like week 1 or week 2 of their jobs, but oftentimes companies are still hiring. And so it meant that I was able to actually tap into that like brand new network in the engineering field. And so actually the first job that I landed at Globality was through one of my cohort mates.
There you go. I've always said this to people because like a lot of people come into the job search and they hear networking. They're like, all right, let me reach out to all the directors of engineering or VPs of engineering. And I'm like, no, like network with people from your cohort or from your boot camp, people that maybe even are just enrolling or people that just graduated. Because like you said, that got you a job. But I didn't have backup to support that, but now I do. So perfect.
Yes. Yeah, definitely recommend. And like you said, going across cohorts, because there's often opportunities to meet people from other cohorts through events, or sometimes you're like, for me, like I was a TA, and so by the time that my students were graduating, they could reach out to me and see what connections I might have out there.
Exactly. So once you get this job offer, was this in the Bay still?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So talk to us like about the first year. Like what were your thoughts? How are you feeling? How was the learning curve?
Yeah, so the learning curve is definitely huge, but the awesome thing about my first job is that it was just a really good fit. So I specifically got into a front end engineering role, which at the time the Hack Reactor curriculum really focused on front end engineering in particular.
Yeah.
And so the way the startup with Globality worked was they had like a really solid front end engineering team. And so there was a great mix of like they had a couple other bootcamp grads like my cohort mate, and then they also had really advanced engineers who'd been in the field for a long time who were there as mentors. And so, yeah, so mentorship is huge. So I would say the first 6 months, I definitely did put in a ton of work and like probably a lot of extra hours just to feel caught up. I definitely know that I felt imposter syndrome a ton, but
Yeah.
yeah, but the great thing about this company, they really really put trust in you, and so I would say by the end of that first year, I felt like I was like shining. Like they had really let me kind of take charge of the work I was doing, and could see that the contributions I was making was really helping out the product, and the fact that the bootcamp skill set was such a good match. We were writing in React, and building a ton of new features for the product. And so so the bootcamp curriculum was just, yeah, helped prepare me for that.
No, it's good. I'm glad you had a great first year. Sounds like you were definitely very productive. What were some of the things you did, like in the first month that kind of set the tone for you to succeed like that?
I think I still remember, actually, I was super excited about my first week because they gave me like a first or a new hire front end bug, and it was a super teeny tiny CSS bug, but I just remember like being super excited because I finished it in the first sprint, and so that meant that I had been onboarded to all of their GitHub repos. I had been able to like read enough of the code base to understand what I was changing. Been able to ask all the questions like from all the engineers who'd been there before to make sure that I wasn't, going to cause any regressions.
Yeah.
So for me, it was, I still remember being super excited about actually like submitting my first bug fix in the first sprint. I feel like that's always, the first accomplishment, and it gets you hooked, because then I feel like the rest of the time you're just kind of like crushing bugs and stories, and yeah.
Yeah, you can like build a momentum as soon as you start like fixing stuff,
Hmm.
you're comfortable, the systems. So yeah, I guess like after like the first year, you're probably like sprinting through, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then during the time at Globality, that was the name of the company, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So Globality, um, did you have the same role and team the whole time, or was there some movement in between?
Yeah. So there was a ton of movement at Globality, actually, which
Okay.
created like a lot of opportunity for growth and learning. So they kind of, because it was still a small team and a small startup, they kind of wanted everybody to train up a lot, in a lot of different areas. And so yeah, every month or every couple months, we would actually shift onto a different project, and like recreate our Scrum teams. Which was a lot of fun because it meant that, maybe on any given month you might be working paired up with a different backend engineer, or you and another front end engineer and two backend engineers would be able to kind of focus on one project or one feature set together. And so yeah, it definitely meant there was a ton of learning. It was very fast paced, but I think that's definitely where I shined, because there was so much trust. It meant that I kind of didn't hold myself back from like giving feedback, because the I think one of the things you realize once you're actually in an engineering role is that it's so much more than just coding. It's not just like 8 hours a day writing hundreds of lines of code. It's also like collaborating with the product managers, getting feedback from customers, or the business side, understanding like your fellow engineers and what everybody wants to learn or work on. And so I think that what that meant is by the end of the year, like I felt like I really had a strong role where, you would start the month and you would actually collaborate with the product team, and like kind of
Yeah.
hash out what some of the, like, what are the trade-offs between some of the technical restrictions versus what you really want to provide the customers. And so like hashing all of those things out with the product team, and then jumping in, getting the first iteration through. We did a ton of MVP kind of iterative work, and so getting through the first MVP, doing an iteration, getting client feedback. It was all a fast paced but awesome experience.
No, that's exactly like I've been hearing that a lot from like guests and also managers. It's like we want engineers coming in with that the product thinking. So it sounds like you were heavily involved with that. Do you think you kind of developed product thinking just by working with products, or was it something else that kind of got you in that mindset?
It's a good question. I think it's so actually originally when I had started thinking about getting into tech, I actually originally thought that I might go down the designer route and actually go into product design. And so I think that because that had been kind of where my interest like actually first sparked a little bit, I think that that has meant that I've kind of always enjoyed looking at it from that angle as well. So like when we start to get introduced to an idea, I enjoy like thinking about like how is the end user going to use this? Are there tweaks we can do? And then also like the great thing about being on the engineering side is you can actually balance that and ask yourself, okay, what are the requirements? How is this going to affect the system? Where are some of the pitfalls that we might run into? And so like kind of marrying those two is a really fun problem to solve.
Yeah, you're the one has to bring it all together, like from these different personalities and stakeholders. So I think that's definitely important to be thinking about every single side.
Absolutely, yeah.
So while you're in the industry, I know in our initial conversation we kind of talked about being a woman as a software engineer. So what are some like the experiences you've had with that, both positive and negative?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a big question. And so I would say definitely everybody has their own experience. And so I'm just like sample size of one here, but but I can share what my experience has been, both good and bad. I would say up front though, the really great thing about my experience is in terms of like explicit bias, I actually haven't encountered that, which has been really great in terms of the boot camp experience and the jobs that I've had. I have to say that's been wonderful because I think that would definitely ruin a lot of my impression, really. So I'm glad that like so far the track record there has been great. And in terms of I would say there is still the implicit bias, which does exist, right? When it comes to systemic biases in a society, like the implicit biases are there, and the tough thing is that often they're hard to pinpoint, right? So the implicit bias that's like very common, but I feel like a lot of women in a lot of industries has to do with like getting a word in edgewise. So maybe in a it's kind of like it's like in a meeting potentially maybe you're talking and then someone talks over you.
Gotcha.
Or you give an idea and then someone repeats that idea a minute later and you literally just said I said the idea. And so there's like those kind of moments where you understand that like it's not an intentional kind of interaction that someone's doing, but the unfortunate thing is because of the systems of biases that do exist in the world and do exist in American society, it happens at a higher rate to women than it does to men, right? And so I would say like working in the industry, that does happen occasionally, and so still working on figuring out how to like give feedback when those moments happen, because the hope is that when someone does do something like that, the hope is that there's no malice or malintent behind it. It's just been part of our society, and unfortunately has been accepted up to this point. And so like figuring out how to like say that to somebody without them getting defensive is always a hard thing. Yeah. So still working on that.
No, so yeah, at least it sounds like it's been mostly positive. Like what you mentioned, I feel like that's not even like tech specific. It's something like, can happen in any job. And something where, yeah, like you said, it's not intentional, but I think, talking about it, hearing about it, people could realize like how it makes others feel. So that's what's important that we brought it up.
Yeah.
So,
and I would say too, on the positive front, one thing that I feel like I've really lucked out at is that because it's an industry that still has underrepresentation of women in this field, it means that oftentimes people who are in leadership roles often don't end up looking like you. It's just kind of like
Yeah.
sometimes you just, want to have a role model who has had a similar experience. And so the thing that I've really appreciated is that I've actually been able to find a lot of that female mentorship. And so I've felt super lucky that that I have those role models in my life, and it's great for like bouncing off ideas or getting career advice from, and or just like having somebody look out for you and support you and encourage you. So on the positive side, that's been great.
Yeah, seeing someone that is like you, that is where you want to go, like that, I think that's really important to see. Like, hey, it's possible. That's part of the reason, like, we do this show. And like when I'm talking to you, is I want people to listen to this, look at you, and be like, all right, like she made it as a software engineer, now she's working at Box, and she's gone through this, and that's something like I can do too. So
Yeah.
you're being that mentor role model right now.
Oh.
So back at the company, so looking at Globality event, you worked there for 3 years, which is kind of long software engineer wise. Usually people are about in a year and a half at companies. So what's the biggest thing that made that a good company to stay at for so long?
So I feel like there's like a whole collection of things for that company. The primary thing is the fact that I just had a lot of friends. The people who were in that startup, we were all like, we're bought into the mission, we're bought into developing this like early stage product. And so it meant that there's a lot of people who are like equally excited about doing the work together and producing really quality products together. And so that kind of built this community among our colleagues. And so the biggest thing was that I just got a lot of friends out of that company, and would never change that for the world. Friends are everything.
Yeah,
So,
the people you work with, it definitely changes every single day that you're working.
It really does. And then the awesome thing about it in general was Globality also had every company kind of has their company values that they really try and bring into the day-to-day work and the way that they run their organization. And I would say that Globality did a really great job. Some of their values, it was like trust and collaboration. And so what that meant is kind of what I was describing earlier, where all of the trust and the collaboration that they really really intentionally formed with that company meant that like everybody was able to do the best work and was able to contribute and like have their voices heard and collaborate with each other. And so that I think when a company like has values like that and like really tries hard to fulfill them, I think that also makes a big difference for your experience as an employee.
Yeah, because I feel like many companies like to have these values that sound good, but then in practice, they don't really embody them really. So I guess when you do find a company that does have those values and does, actually integrate them into the workplace, then it's probably a good place to stay. But what eventually made you say, okay, like it's time to move on and look at other opportunities?
Yeah, I think the main reason was, like you said, it had been about 3 years, and it was my first job out of the boot camp. And so it had been an amazing opportunity for me to be able to grow and like find my feet and find my interests. But I had essentially hit the point where I was really looking to kind of grow my engineering skill set, learn a ton more fundamentals, get a perspective on how to build a system at scale, so that I could kind of figure out like, am I someone who really enjoys startups or big companies, or are there like really good like technical skills that a big company could teach me and that I could bring back if that's where my interest lies. And so that 3-year mark was essentially where I was like, okay, I'm ready now. I'm ready to like kind of like elevate my skills and like challenge myself to learn a new code base and and just build my skill set there.
So then, once you're an engineer with 3 years experience, it's much easier that time around than the first job. So I know you probably got bombarded with recruiters the whole time. So was it Box recruiting you, or did you actively go out and start applying to companies with this new job search?
I was pretty active. So it was at a moment where, like, since I was kind of prepared, and I had a mix where I had a collection of emails from recruiters that I finally was like, oh yep, I'm ready.
Time.
Let's start the interview process. And then I also so Box was actually through network. So
There
Box
you
was a
go.
company. Yeah, I'd heard awesome things about, particularly about like their culture and their company values. I'd heard amazing things about it, so they were definitely on like one of my wish list. And then I had a few other companies at the same time as well, who I'm pretty sure I reached out to old Hack Reactor cohort mates as well to see what they were doing, whether they liked their company, and applied with them as well.
How's the interview process like once you're 3 years in? Because I know I've seen some companies that say, all right, we're only going to give technical assessments to junior engineers, but then for people that are experienced, it's like seen as kind of like a disrespect, So some companies don't do that. So did you see any of that in terms of like differences between first job search versus second?
Yeah, actually, I hadn't really thought about, but you're right. The first job search, I think there was only one experience like that where I had like a take home project assignment to work on, and then the second time around, it was pretty standard. Like it was typically one recruiter screen, one technical. A lot of them had one technical phone screen where you were just just on the phone with an engineer. It was pretty brief, answering general coding questions, or
It was like a
kind of like,
quiz.
yeah, some of them were kind of just because a lot of the applications were for front end engineers, so it would be like just general, like maybe HTML, CSS, general like web browser, like networking, HTTP requests, like kind of very very general front end engineering concepts. And so that would be like just a couple questions, pretty brief. And then the core of the interview was the on-site, where you'd have anywhere from like 3 to 5 technical interviews, and maybe one interview with the hiring manager, which was a little more behavioral. Yeah.
Wait, so you said 3 to 5 technical interviews?
Trying to remember. Maybe I feel like on average it would probably be 3 technical. 3 technical and 1 behavioral would be like the general experience. Yeah.
Plus recruiter phone screen.
Hmm?
Said plus
Pardon?
recruiter phone screen. So like 5 conversations total about?
Yeah.
Okay.
About that.
Yeah. Those interview processes are definitely thorough.
They're very thorough. Yeah. Yeah.
So you get into Box. Box is a great company. I actually just listened to Aaron on a podcast recently, so he's great.
Awesome. Yeah.
What would you say is the biggest difference though between Globality, which is about a 200-person company, versus Box, which is a 3,000-person company?
I think the biggest difference there is kind of where your like center of engagement kind of falls. So in the smaller company, you're kind of all like there's one, at least in the early stage startup, there was one core product. And so everybody from the business side to the engineering side to the product side, everybody was generally focused on like the same core mission or the same core product. Whereas at a larger company, especially one that's been around a while, you'll have like several core products and like several core like roadmaps that the company is working towards. And so that just means that like you're in one of 3 main buckets, or maybe you're in a side product instead of the core product. So in terms of like where your focus is, I think it's also, I'm speaking this way because I'm a very product oriented engineer. so that's also just how I view my work. And so I see it more as like, okay, so that's kind of where my center of focus is. And that's also means that's the people I work with as well. So I might only really know the people within my department, and it might be a 200-person department. So it's still the same size as the smaller company, but it just means that like, you're not going to get to know 3,000 people. It's just you kind of like understand what your sphere of influence is.
Yeah. So it's like, I guess like in the big company like Box, you get to be kind of more specialized because like you're more siloed. But in the startup, everyone's kind of working towards one single mission. So you have your hand in everything, whether it be product marketing, customer support, like you just kind of integrate everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So coming out of boot camp, what do you think is better as a first environment? Do you think one has an advantage over the other?
That's a good question. Honestly, I think it's a personal preference sort of thing. Like I would recommend trying out both at some point in your career, because I would say there's pluses and minuses to both. Both in terms of like your growth, because even though I'm like a little more focused on a particular project at the big company, the alternative is that you're also at a big company, and so a lot of the techniques that you learn and a lot of the problems you solve have a lot to do with scale. And so you actually learn a lot around like what the future of a startup might end up looking like, and you need to build towards. So you learn those things, but then at the startup, it means that you have a lot more kind of like say you have a lot more influence over where the product might go, because you're a lot closer to like the center of gravity there. So I would say you learn a lot in both scenarios, and both have pros and cons, and so you kind of need to figure out where you land.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing I always hear people say when they go to startups is I want my impact to be felt, or I want to see the results of my work. So I guess it's true. You know, there's faster turnaround times. Box, you work with like enterprise clients, so I'm guessing like the changes must go through a kind of more complex process to.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and like there's a lot more things to learn when you're dealing with like large enterprises, because there's a lot of like regulations, compliance, different things that you really have to take care of. And yeah, so it's a different skill set.
All right, perfect. So now looking at the next stage of your career, like are you sticking with Box for a while? You looking on the horizons, like you trying to look at different fields? What's the latest?
Yeah, at the moment, I'm definitely just sticking with Box. I've been really thankful that a lot of what I had thought about Box, like in terms of what I had seen for the company culture, company values before I had joined, I was happy to say that they're also a company that's like really focuses on that and tries really hard. So like they take care of their employees really well, especially with this year with the pandemic. I've just been really thankful that they've done such a good job taking care of us, switching to the remote life, making sure that we get the time off we need, like all that kind of support. Been very thankful for. And then in terms the great thing too in terms of kind of like my learning growth. Actually, recently within Box, so one of the pros of working at a big company is if you're interested, you can actually switch teams. And so more recently, I was actually kind of interested in like learning a little bit broader. Like it's still within my organization, but it's like a slightly different set of code bases and coding languages that I'm working in. And so I had the opportunity to kind of do a bit of a switch. So I'm actually learning some Swift, some iOS development, and so learning how to build a CLI. So yeah, it's actually been a really good opportunity for me to learn and expand my technical horizon. So yeah, so I'm gonna stay for a while. It's great.
No, yeah, that's a cool part of it. Like you mentioned, a big company says you can kind of get a fresh start in the same company. So
yeah,
it's cool. So we're getting close to the top of the hour. So for anyone that's listening, just make sure again to subscribe, leave a like if you're enjoying it. But yeah, let's go into the last two questions, guys. So one question I always ask everyone is, if you're graduating from a boot camp today, what's your game plan to get hired?
So I feel like I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I think game plan number one is really tap into that network. So because I think you don't really realize like how big of a network you start getting when you start meeting a bunch of new cohort mates going through a boot camp. You meet your cohort mates, your teachers, prior students. So definitely use that. And be reciprocal, right? So like if you might unbeknownst to you, you might actually have some connections to some companies that one of your cohort mates is interested in, and so you can make that a reciprocal kind of connection. So network is number one. The number two is definitely apply. Our mindset at the when I at the time of graduating Hack Reactor was definitely just like fire off as many applications as you can. Sometimes at the end of the day, it's a numbers game when you're just starting when you're just starting out and you're trying to get your foot in the door with your first job. Sometimes it's just a numbers game and you just gotta fire away and apply as much as you can. Yeah. And I would also say the third thing is actually like be confident, be proud of yourself about like the work that you've done through the boot camp, because you actually don't realize that you are so ready to interview. Like like you really are, that like, compared to a lot of people who've been in the industry for a while, like, you know, their interview skills are a little rusty. They might not remember some of like the key algorithms that end up getting you know, asked as part of interview questions, but like you're ready. And so so I would definitely say like yeah, don't hold yourself back. Like I know, I definitely know that I did. And in hindsight, once you start doing interviews, and the more interviews you do, honestly, I would say with each interview, it's like practice for the next interview. I feel like by the time I was on like the fifth or sixth interview that I was doing, I, you know, sometimes they repeat questions. So like you're like getting more and more prepared with each interview you do. So it's totally okay if the first few don't work out. Just keep powering through, and it'll be great.
Yeah, exactly. Your answers just keep getting better. You get more comfortable. So
yeah,
that's good. And then the last question. So what should every bootcamp grad be doing in the first year of their career to get it off to, you know, a great start?
Yeah. So that's a awesome question. And the funny thing is, I think because I've been out in the industry for a while, my tone has changed, because I would actually say like the number one thing you should be doing in your first year, start an exercise routine. Like take care, like
I love it. I love it.
yeah, find things to like manage your stress levels, like see your friends, I don't know, like pick up gardening, do something. Because you really, you know, once your foot is in the door, you're in it, you're there. And so if you can just do the things to like just take care of yourself, take care of any stress that you might experience, because it is a new experience, I would say focus on that first. The rest will come as part of your work. And the second thing I would actually also say is just reflecting on, I feel like I got super lucky by landing my first job as a really good fit, but I also know that not everybody does. And so the other thing I would say about your first year is actually don't feel stuck. I think sometimes people might stay in their first job maybe longer than what really makes them happy. But I feel like I found some cohort mates or some friends who did Hack Reactor a little while after I did, who landed their first job and it wasn't quite the right fit. And then they you know, after a few months, they actually started interviewing again, and it worked out. They got their second job. They were much happier. They were able to be a little more discerning at that point. So that would be the other thing I'd say is if you end up landing the job and it doesn't quite sit right, don't feel stuck.
I really like that you mentioned that, because I feel the same, where people might feel like I have to stay in this company. You know, I don't have experience to leave yet, but like you said, you need to find the right fit. There's a bunch of companies out there, a bunch of different situations, and you know, make sure it's a match.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's it for tonight. So Skye, thank you so much. William's also saying thank you so much, Skye. So definitely
Thank
some
you.
appreciation. And then there'll be a bunch of people that listen to this and get to learn from your experiences too. But otherwise, thank you again for your time, for sharing some stuff that people can learn from to boot up their careers. And for everyone else that's listening, thank you for joining us. Until next week. Bye.
Awesome. Thank you.